videos and resources on the TSF website. We're going to move into the next session now, which is really telling you a little bit about what we've learned along our journey. Really, one of the aims of TESF, besides funding these wonderful projects, has been to try and draw together, to synthesize, to weave together the learnings. And that in itself is an art form. It requires bringing in the voices of all those involved in the national workshops, in our synthesis week, which we held recently, in our legacy conference, where we all had the chance to reflect on what we've learned together, to listen and learn from each other's projects. And it's a real art. And I have the enormous pleasure now of introducing our hub leads or our hub partners who are going to be taking you through what we've learned under the different themes in the 4 breakout rooms. And this session is called The World We Want. It reflects the hope, but also the challenges ahead of us. And then in room 3, my wonderful colleague, Michael Tusiime, will be leading the discussion there about education for sustainable cities and communities and what we've learned there.
Hi.
Yes, thank you so much and welcome to room 3. Glad to have you. Just for a structure, we are going to have this for 55 minutes. I'm going to be presenting for 10 minutes. Then we have a discussion on the key messages for 20 minutes. And then we have a discussion on the call for action for another 20 minutes. So once again, foremost, I want to welcome you all. I'm Michael from Rwanda and co-investigator Rwanda Hub. I want to commend all the teams from the different countries because what I'm going to be presenting is actually part of it is their work. I'm just privileged to be the presenter here. And thank you so much. I'll upload and then we kick it from there. And I hope you can see the uploaded page. So like I said, in this room, we're exploring sustainable cities and communities. But I want to, first of all, what is the challenge? What is the challenge that actually leads us to, getting out these key messages and then later the call for action? In rapidly developing cities, urban dwellers have enormous experiences. These include lack of arable land, high cost of living, poor housing, scarcity of water, waste management systems. All these challenges bring us the question to how can education be transformed to building the skills, the knowledge, and the right attitude so that the city dwellers and the communities can be able to proactively mitigate these challenges. And some of the key messages that we got from the recommendations that were done from Somalia, from Rwanda, from India, from South Africa, with the support of the team from Bristol, we have key messages that came out across the 4 hubs. And these came out as recommendations. We're going to be discussing them later, but one of them was that transformative knowledge needs to be co-created and co-owned by those impacted by the challenges of the urban and rural living in different conditions. We talk about this because we know the urban cities and the rural areas are spaces that are characterized by people who have power and people who have privilege, but also people who are vulnerable. And the moment you don't co-create, because the moment you don't co-design, then absolutely that doesn't lead to transformative knowledge. That doesn't lead to sustainability. We have examples of many projects from India, from South Africa, from Somalia, from Rwanda, that can attest to the need for co-creation and co-ownership of knowledge if that very knowledge is going to be sustainable. Talk about planting trees in drought areas. Talk about fighting floods, talk about every other project that we've talked about. There is power in co-design and co-creation for sustainable and transformative knowledge. That was one of the key messages that came out. Another message that came out very strong was that all studies found that establishing relational trust is central to knowledge co-creation. There is need to explicitly nurture empathy and build trust in teaching and learning spaces. We say this one considering that different forms of vulnerabilities, poverty, and other forms of marginalizations, transformative education cannot thrive in an environment of mistrust between the duty bearers and the right holders. There is absolutely need to establish targeted intervention, targeted approaches so that people trust each other. If I don't trust, if I feel like I'm not involved, it came out very strongly across all projects. In the interest of time, I'm not mentioning all projects here, but it came out that in projects where there was trust, there was, empathy. You needed to put yourself in the other's shoes, especially the marginalized groups, to understand that they live, to understand they have knowledge, to understand they have values, and their side matters as well. It came out when we're training, women in the north in Rwanda. It came out during, the tree planting sessions and how the different actors were, trusted in Somali and all that. India, the same, came out very strong. The third message, the third key message, and note that we're going to be discussing these ones later. That's why I'm a bit faster. The third key message is that urban education should proactively engage problem solving and seeking out alternatives to sustainably mitigate the pressures of urban life. It should be relevant to the people's lives and inward looking. People should be able to see the immediate value addition to the acquired skills and knowledge. Any knowledge in the urban context, in marginalized populations, that doesn't create knowledge that is going to solve an immediate problems, then that knowledge is not taken as serious. That knowledge is not transformative. A number of examples across the TSF projects attest to this issue. We talk about congestion, poverty, and literacy in Rwanda. Many projects, empowered people to develop functional adult literacy. We talk about food security projects in India. We talk about water justice in South Africa. We talk about eco schools for drought mitigation in Somalia. Very good projects. But these projects, one of the key characteristics were that these projects were addressing an immediate and threatening need. And the moment you acquire knowledge to address these needs, then that knowledge becomes transformatory because it gets personal. It solves a problem that has been haunting you. So this one came out very, very profound as well. Then another key message, the imperative of democratizing learning spaces to enable use of indigenous languages.
Michael, sorry to interrupt. I think you're on the first slide still, so I'm not sure if you meant to move over.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you so much. So we talk about we talked about urban education needing to engage alternatives. One thing that came out again is the need to democratize knowledge. And by saying this, absolutely, there are projects in India that focused on using language and music and cultures. There are projects that are tackled on financial literacy. There are projects in Somalia about indigenous language curricula. What we mean is that learning spaces need to be democratized. And by democratization, we mean everyone feeling they have an upper hand, one, in communicating, in sharing knowledge in the language forms they understand. One typical example, even under the trees, most of these projects did their validations under trees. That is compared to doing a validation under a special hotel or something. So this one again, I think going forward, we should always, not underestimate the power of communicating within, of living an authentic life, and learning spaces in this context needs to be democratized. Another thing that came out very strong, the learning institutions, the learning spaces. We have a situation where a school in Rwanda, for example, was turned into a learning space for adult functional literacy in the evenings. Usually these schools are closed. So we need to explore our education infrastructure and how we can democratize it by making them accessible. Another thing that came out very strong is that, just a second, the need to use local resources. This came out very, very strong. Local resources meaning that there is a lot of learning advantages, lots of learning spaces, lots of materials that we can use that are constructively, if you refer to constructivism, that people relate to. You talk about, for example, the water being used in India as a resource to explore social dimensions of inequality and privileges. In South Africa, you have another resource, geo stories or citizen science projects. That is also another example of the power of using local forms of communication and local resources. In Rwanda, you have a curricula being developed in Kinyarwanda to help communities get out of GBV. You have curricula being developed in Rwanda to teach digital literacy. These are foreign concepts, but if you don't deconstruct and use the local language and resources, then that education doesn't stay longer, doesn't get sustained. You have South Africa photography, all these, to empower healing spaces, all these indications that absolutely use of local resources and art forms are catalysts for dialogue on issues of inequality. The beauty of this is that some of the topics are very sensitive. If you are teaching about gender-based violence, you better use a language form that is, very neutral, drama, as opposed to lecture. All these projects came out really very, very strong. All these key messages came out. Now, I told you that I was going to use 10 minutes. The most important thing, which has been a characteristic of TESF project, is to dialogue and communicate and talk and debate and share ideas. So on each of the 6 messages that I just read, I know there are people in the audience with whom we have conducted this research across hubs, India, South Africa, Somalia, and in Rwanda as well. We want to make sure that we share ideas. Let us make a reflection. We're going to use about 25 minutes to 30 to just dialogue and share our reflections on each of the key messages that I just read out. In the interest of just to tickle your brains, I'm going back to the first key message. And then we can share your experience on it as a researcher with whom we've worked with. We also have people who have not been part of the mainstream TESF projects, who are researchers, who are policymakers on this platform. We want to make sure that we share space, as we said. We democratize this space and everyone has something to say if they have to. So the issue of co-creation in your experiences as a researcher, anyone from my colleagues or anybody who possibly has a reflection on that, especially in terms of leading transformative knowledge and sustainable futures. You possibly are going to unmute yourself and share whatever perspective you have on the first key message here. The need to co-create knowledge in order to have impactful urban and rural living conditions. And these ones goes to some of my colleagues. I may not have captured well the context in your country, it may also be another researcher who wants to share an idea here. Yes, Dan?
Thank you, Mike, for the good presentation, which is very clear to see how we managed to put together the ideas, perspective from different countries and different hub and different communities, different people with different background to create this. So what I think about co-creation in sustainable cities, I think the cities are expanding very fast, and there are many crises linked to that expansion. As you said, there are poverty issues, climate disruption issues, increasing inequality issues, and some conflict that are appearing from different problems and different challenges. So I think it is very important to co-create, to work together, to have collaboration with all people who are affected by those crises and those challenges. You know, sometimes we used to think that academicians should go there and analyze the problems and suggest the solutions. But it was clear that from the experience which came from all the project from different hub, it was clear that if those who are affected are not involved in that analysis of problem and in the suggestions of solutions, it can't work effectively and efficiently. If we want the solutions to work, we need the ownership of those who are affected. If they don't honor those solutions, then it is very hard to implement them at local level. So that is why we need to work together. We need to collaborate. We need the involvement of everyone at all stages. So that is what I think about this first suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much for that. I think the ethics that none of us has monopoly over knowledge is very key here, and everyone has the right to contribute in their different capacities. So thank you for that intervention. We have another person here who, if I don't see your hand, please, you may just talk. We're going to be able to listen to you. We have
Dieudonné had their hand up. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Let me enter from where you ended, that no one has a monopoly of knowledge. And I add that we really need to collaborate with the community to create knowledge. Another reason is that, you know, life is changing very quickly, and especially when it comes to cities, with the improvement of communication tools on the screen, especially, we have seen that knowledge is changing very quickly, social phenomena are changing very quickly, and solutions are changing very quickly. So the academia may not be aware of how changes have happened, and the community out there, they have had ways of addressing the challenges that have started in their communities, and those challenges need to be reflected scientifically so that can be more informative and also be documented. So I think the academia, NGOs, and the government need to go down there to the people in the communities to learn of what has been the solutions over the problems that has risen in their communities, so that they can learn from there, but also inform of what others are doing elsewhere. So this brings us as academia and teachers the kind of need and the calling and or imperative calling that we need to collaborate with the community, but also to collaborate with the NGOs or activists and the government to try to bring comprehensive solutions to the challenges of the cities that we are living in today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dieudonné. Thank you so much for keeping your interventions very brief so that we have as many people as we can. Shavi Mathu.
Thank you. I was working on with the project where we were developing cross-disciplinary water curriculum.
Shavi, you may want to get close the microphone. We're not hearing you well.
Okay. Is this better?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying that I was part of the group that was developing a cross-disciplinary water curriculum in India, and which basically meant that no one person could develop that. And we brought in people from with different expertise to work on different modules, different topics. But we also brought in this, we didn't just bring in experts, we brought in educators and water professionals and also students. And during the course of the, when we were testing this curriculum, we realized that students with whom we were, who were helping us test these topics were themselves creating material that we could use as a part of the curriculum. My question to the group, if I may ask, is that it was not an easy task to help people from different, with different expertise, with different, different daily lives, to communicate with each other. And it was a struggle. It was a repetition of a lot of things. It was a lot of moderation. And I wonder, I would like to know if some of the other people who worked with this aspect of with while co-creating, whether they faced these kind of issues and what kind of methodologies were useful for them. Because for me, it was a lot of moderation which was required, and I believe it's also a skill which probably is needed as we go further to build, co-create a lot of these knowledges. We need people with skills who can moderate such work as well. So I would love to hear from the group about their challenges and how they were able to work through them. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Shavi. You say it was difficult, but I'm glad you did it. You did it in the circumstances and it worked well. So I do think, reflecting on your question, I'm going to next, I make a comment and then you go to Sake. I think the whole idea of co-creation, I think, also goes beyond the language. Of course, language is very key that people understand each other. But now Rwanda is a bit monolingual. We didn't experience much of that. But I'm imagining that co-creation also has to do with issues of trust. We absolutely need to trust the people that we are working with beyond communication, to empower the spirit that they too have something to say, listening to them. Because trust me, sometimes you can speak the same language, but there are psychological barriers, the inequalities that inherently make your message blocked out, and the whole issue of co-creation gets into a mess. So I think there's the language issue here. There's also the respect, the ethics of care that Leon talked about, the trust, the relational trust. All these are critical ingredients of co-designing and co-creation. If someone has another idea, I'm still going to share, but Sake, do you have Flabezo? I hope I said your name right.
Hi, good morning. I'm not sure if I'm audible, but I'm hoping I am. And I just want to reflect broadly. I'll be quite brief. The principle and the necessity of co-creating knowledge with different communities and doing it intentionally reminds me a lot of the approach that one has taken or has to take when they're developing a movement or building a social movement. The point of going in, you don't just mobilize on a point of commonality, but there's a very much clear point of having to co-create what is it that we agree on as a community grouping, and therefore to build a movement around it, what are the avenues you must take. And what's quite important is that it also allows pathways to recognize some more organic sets of knowledge or insights that we wouldn't have looked at primarily because of our own points of departure as individuals. But to one of the previous speakers' points, I do think it does require an agile and flexible facilitation skill that has to be coupled also with the investment in time. It's often hard to ever predict exactly how much time you need to do to invest into building and nurturing the relationships in the spaces and then harnessing them so that you can really start to co-create something meaningful. It doesn't always work with project timelines, to be quite honest. You might find yourself 2-3 months in and then you haven't made progress that is tangible or visible, but what that investment allows you to do is at the end develop something meaningful. Does it always balance out with the timelines? I don't think so. But ultimately, if you prioritize the substance of what you're doing over those sort of elements, there's something really meaningful and important to be said. So I just want to touch on that, and particularly from a civil society or movement building perspective, how similar it is and what a great strategy it is to really prioritize and center organic knowledge sets and develop a truly community-oriented driven set of knowledge principles and priorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sake. You mentioned investment in time and effort. When we are doing our national legacy, we said, okay, beyond this space, can we always keep in touch with the people that we worked with? Because again, trust goes on and the projects go on. One question, Vincent, do you have you have a second to say something, Vincent? I can see you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike. I just want to highlight something about the co-creation approach. From the experience of the project in Rwanda, I've seen that this is another way of getting out of the academic routine of doing research and publish only, but this is a way of sharing issues, sharing activities with the community, and then get action. And this, it can well inform or change the routine of technocracy in urban planning, whereby you see people are sitting in the offices and then they make the urban planning without considering the population's issues. And this in this approach, we learn that there is another way of proceeding by getting first the insight from the community and then plan for the cities. And they may see that from little, people can learn more and can do many things from the small projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. And we come to the whole issue. We talk about trust, we talk about co-creation. Now, when you talk about empathy, communicating with empathy, especially that the vulnerable groups, by nature of their vulnerabilities, by nature of how traditionally they've been respected or not, how is it possible that you were able to work with people who traditionally would not be expected to have a voice and get them on board? Was it easy for you? What did you do so that the people that you were working with, especially the vulnerable groups, came out trusting you and working with you to achieve the project goals? Any strategies that you can share? And anyone, please, especially referring to your journey during the implementation of the TSF projects, or in reflection anyway. Or put it in another way, how easy was it to listen to that person who didn't have the level of complexity to say something that you as an academician, as a researcher, would have wanted to be very clear? Anna James?
Yeah, hi, Michael. Thank you for the session so far. Maybe just a short reflection from my project. I worked together with the African Water Commons Collective in Cape Town, South Africa. And I find the question quite interesting because I have been working with and learning from the African Water Commons Collective even since before becoming a researcher. And so in a way, there was a long-standing relationship, and our project emerged from an already clarified need by the social movement for a kind of research. And so in a sense, we had this benefit of a kind of long-standing sort of time and relationship and an understanding way of working, to ensure that there was a kind of shared way of thinking about the research. So having said that, though, when one is working out the details of the research, there is still always kind of little translations that have to be made, and ways of thinking, that need to be shared, and a lot of care needs to be taken in how one kind of makes the translation from people's experiences on the ground to a kind of broader audience. So I think maybe I know many projects did a lot of really important, careful work building the relationship, but I think also there's one thing that this grant did offer was the opportunity for researchers to foreground the needs that have the research questions that are coming from a grassroots kind of context rather than from an academic sort of community. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. And you also referred to what Vincent said earlier. As long as the participants understand that the project is foregrounded into their needs, absolutely, that is one step of building trust. If they perceive that the project is responding to their needs, not to the needs of the people who bring the projects. And I think Leon talked about, all the projects being made intentionally to address the needs of the research participants in this space in the South. So I think, thank you, Anna, for that. Glad that you had a long-standing relationship, but also glad that you maneuvered very well so that your messages were gotten very right. Any other perspectives as we move on? We want to really hear, to as many people as possible on any of the themes, either trust, either empathy, on the key messages that we mentioned here. Okay, John Samanya.
Thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. One key observation that we came to understand in our project in Somalia, we identify that the participants or the community understand that they have weaknesses. And they also understand that they need support, especially from the external partners. But that's why the co-creation comes in. When the support comes in, it should not be top down, like it's directly coming to address the challenges that are affecting the community. But when the support comes in, they also need to be involved in designing and implementing the solution to the problem that they're encountering. So the key thing is that through this message of co-creation, the participants are always aware of their weaknesses, and they understand what they need. The only challenge is that when the help comes, they should not be secluded when it comes to designing and implementing solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. John. And when we intentionally talked about building sustainability pathways throughout the project, I think that's what we meant. That we could only be with the communities at a given time, that these projects had a lifetime, and beyond that lifetime, we would be there as community members, but not as, so the moment the teams got it as theirs, traveled together, co-implemented, collected research, analyzed it, participated in national dissemination sessions and events, participated in national legacy events, I think then they are at a level where they are comfortable and they have ownership of their products. They have ownership of the knowledge that they have acquired, and they're going to use the knowledge to help them mitigate the challenges they face on a daily basis. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. I think it's critically very important to think about involving people just at the start when we are starting projects, because then when you phase out, they already are confident enough and comfortable to take up their own initiatives. And thank you for sharing your perspectives. Is there anyone I think I haven't, I haven't seen? You may raise your arm and your finger, and I mean your thumb, and I don't see you. So sorry if I missed any one of you. Okay, yes, we have Luzanne. Luzanne, thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please, we hear you.
Yes, yeah. I'm not sure if the microphone's working with these headphones, so it's a bit of an experiment. Yeah, just some reflections from our project in South Africa. We were working with ECD practitioners, early childhood development centers, around establishing small food gardens as a food security intervention. And I think this relates to the building trust and networks, but also the knowledge co-creation. Because one of the things that we found is it was so important to be able to work with networks and partnerships that were already established and trusted. So we didn't come in as a collaborative research project, sort of parachuting from outside, that almost everyone in the project knew the other partners just through being in our small city together over years. So that was really, really important. But the one thing that has struck us is that as much as that is a strength, it can also be a challenge, because there are already what you could call like established cultures, ways of doing things together that have come from maybe the past decade of relationships, that kind of people enter the project thinking this is going to be more of the same. And so when we have a project that's trying to do things differently in a more transformative way, a more sort of knowledge co-creation approach, the practitioners are a little bit unsure what to make of it, and aren't accustomed to being spontaneous, sharing ideas, expressing their agency, because there's a historical sort of a legacy of, especially preschools in low-income areas, sort of waiting for donors to arrive with a plan, and then a culture of them gratefully receiving that. And it took quite a lot of work in our project to try and shift that established culture. So I think one of the big lessons we learned is that it's not just as simple as saying, oh, we've got some transformative ways of doing things, and assume that everyone immediately understands that and can just start doing it. It takes time to understand the shared vision and find ways of working together that everyone feels comfortable with. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisan. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. I think you're right. You're right that every time we want to implement projects, it's better to work with existing and trusted networks. Every other community will have a network. It may be an opinion leader. It may be an organization that has been working with the same community. Sometimes you want to respect the social structures, professional social structures, traditional social structures that you find in the community, because those ones help you in terms of community entry. But also you mentioned a challenge that comes with that, which is, trying not to offset a culture while trying to change things. And even the word transformation may want to be discussed fully before people have a common understanding of what it is. So I know those are challenges that you know, people have met. If you are trying to promote gender, you know, fight gender-based violence, for example, and people are traditionally, culturally, you know, have cultural templates of how they live, and part of their lifestyles could be gender oppressive. How do you change that? I think it's important to also use people within communities sometimes to communicate your message, because sometimes when you get into communities, you are perceived as a quote unquote a foreigner, if I may. Another way to, if I reflect again on how to build co-creation and trust, we had a project in Rwanda, tree planting, one child, one tree, for example. We had one event where the children brought their parents to school, the local leaders were there, the minister was there. I usually refer to that example. In one space, one time, they were planting a tree. And the child now who takes care of the tree has that memory that this tree was planted with the support of the local leaders and their parents who helped give him or her water to water the tree. That's ownership. The students have very, very emotional attachments on the trees, and the trees are growing into a thick, you know, forest. So very critically important. And we listen to you, Vensa, as we progress.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I just want to highlight the interaction of variety of actors or stakeholders, and whereby you can see the local residents and local leaders, students, university students, and the university researchers, so they're gathering in one place, making a discussion in the university. It is very, very important to see, for instance, to see the local the resident. He always using to pass through the university campus without entering there. Then it has been very interesting to see him sitting with the academia, or sitting with the local leaders, then discussing on different issues. So it is very, very important, because that people feel a kind of empathy, and then the contribution and the role or value of the contribution in solving problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. You mentioned something very important, and we talked about it earlier, democratization of learning spaces, and demystifying some of the perceptions that we have of the universities. You talk about a local leader entering a university to have a discussion with an academia. This is something that is not traditionally common, because universities are perceived as elite islands where knowledge is manufactured and just disseminated downwards. And the fact that the local leaders, their communities can engage in a space at a university, the fact that the university lecturers, the researchers can be under a tree in the most rural area, speak the language of the research participants, and together think about a solution to a community need. I think this is this is very imperative. It's rewarding, it's transformational, it's sustainable, because at the end of the day, like we said, none of us has monopoly over knowledge. Our knowledge can be created irrespective of the places. I think my colleague from Somalia talked about it, under a tree, on the table, in the kitchen, everywhere. So I think you mentioned a very critical point. Let us learn, share, democratize our learning spaces, and appreciate that knowledge can be created anywhere. Any idea before calls for action? But I wanted to make sure that everyone is listened to. If you have any other idea from these messages, maybe this time for you to mention, because you're going to transition shortly into the calls for action. John, do you have your hand, or it's the former hand that is still up? Okay, thank you so much. All right, let us go to the next phase, which is the call for action. Let's go to the call for action. We have call for actions and address to different people, different categories. How do we transform our communities through transformative education? And we have 4 categories here. We have researchers, most of us are. We have educators, again, most of us are. We have policymakers who may be with us, but I also know some of us, move from teachers to policymakers. You occupy some space in the policy making arena. Then you have engaged activists. Now, we say the call for action that researchers should involve city dwellers and communities, including vulnerable populations, in the early stages of research and action, including problem identification. I also know that it sounds easy on paper, but it may be difficult in practice. So for you researchers, for us researchers who are here, how is this ideal easy? What are the best practices? And what do we lose if we don't follow this trend? Again, reflecting on your projects, those you've done and those you may want to do in the future. How easy is this ideal? What are the challenges that you may involve? Because we want to learn so that we avoid any further challenges on this. John Samanya?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is very important to involve the city dwellers or the project beneficiaries, even at the problem identification stage. However, it has some challenges. One of the challenges is that if you involve these beneficiaries, one, you raise expectations. And at times when you are maybe applying for these project grants, you are not sure whether you're going to get the grant. So if you involve them and you don't get, the next time it will be very hard to involve them. So that's why it is a little bit challenging at the start. That's why when you are designing, at times you design, then you involve them later when you have already maybe won the project. That's the key thing I see, or the key challenge.
John, did we lose you?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that is the key, the key main challenge is raising expectations. And if you don't win maybe the first time, the second time it's likely to be very hard again to bring back these people. That's why at the project application stage or the design stage of the project, at times these beneficiaries are left out and brought on board later. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I'll let the colleagues react to that. Have you been in a similar situation? Do you have any response to John's concern? Any colleague that has a response to John's concern? I think if I may reflect on that, Mr. John, I totally agree with you that sometimes it can be very challenging to engage in a problem identification process because there are funds involved, and by then the grants are not yet in. But I also want to indicate or think that to believe that projects, one of the key characteristics of a good project is the flexibility to move along the demands of the people, even without altering the focus of the project. For example, even after the grant, if we say they were not involved in the identification of the problem, I do believe that even after the grant, it's never too late to involve them to explain the various dimensions to which they want the projects to take without altering the focus, of course. I think, to me, that's what I really think. It's challenging, but it's doable if we have that design principle in mind that we should co-create during the identification or at a later stage when the problem has been identified, but we give the participants the possibility to reorient the problem, provided it serves their own interests, provided it's within the scope of the project. And thank you so much. But with that, I also understand it's challenging. So it was just a suggestion of the plan Bs that you can do. And colleagues, I hope you're still together. From the researchers, we have educators here. And we're going to be asking ourselves quite a number of questions here. For the educators, we say educators should acknowledge there are multiple ways of learning and multiple spaces and locations other than the conventional schools. Colleges and universities, educators should appreciate that transformative learning cannot always be quantified by indicators like grades and explicit observations. Embracing lifelong education initiatives and non-conventional community education to empower vulnerable youth and adults in cities and rural areas with skills, knowledge, values, and competencies to live sustainable lives. That's a huge statement that we as educators should use this space to think about. My understanding is that there is some level of obsession with grades with marks, with certificates, so much that any learning that is useful to the community that is not certified or given a grade tends to be diluted. If my observation holds, what do you think? How do we transform education? By embracing alternative forms of education, not the mainstream. And given that the mainstream is much stronger, I don't know whether I'm very correct here. So what are your thoughts on that? Especially thinking about the projects that you implemented. Xavi?
Yeah, hi. Am I audible?
Hello?
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, I hear you. I hear you well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so one thing that we tried during the water curriculum is we had a end of term exhibition after it was a 2 month process, and then at the end of it we had an exhibition of the work that students had done. So that was one of the spaces where we could bring in something which was not totally dependent on the grades. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Xavi. I think we agree that there are multiple ways of learning and there are different forms of knowledge, some quantified, some certified, but nonetheless, all knowledge is regarded important in personal and social transformation. So, colleagues, I'm reminded that we close out the breakup rooms.
7 projects. So congratulations to the hubs for leading those and for the incredible work of the projects in those 4 different thematic areas. I know the time was short, Hala. We would love to